Hi, and welcome back to the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Aaronson, and I'm joined by my co-host, Beau Higgins.
Wingman, hoorah, Semper Fi.
Let's go. Let's go, Beau. Welcome back. Today, we've got Joseph Cabrera joining us from Mainshares. We're going to learn a little bit more about search funds and buying small businesses. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. Joseph, thank you for joining us today.
Oh man, it's good to be here and stoked to be here and see you both. Like it was the thing we were sharing before the show. Anytime I get to hang out with some Marines, happy day.
Good. Well, we'll try not to give you too much shit about being an Army vet. We'll try. Tim gives me shit all day, every day. So it's like, yeah, I mean, Anyway, Joseph, I've given a 30,000 foot overview of your background. Honestly, just like barely any information. So just to start, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Yeah, sure, man. Well, again, stoked to be here today. A little bit about me. I'm from South Texas. It's where I grew up. I'm the son of a career public servant and someone who, second generation Army guy. And then my mother was the entrepreneur in the family. And so for me, I always had this really cool dynamic of like running around South Texas playing Army, while also like hustling baseball cards, at the schoolyard and like selling things. It was just something that was like very natural to me to just do commerce. And so I knew that my folks never forced me to do either one of those things, but I just think through their example, I was like, all right, I'm going to serve my country first. And then I'm probably going to pursue business at some point later, but I figure after a 20, 30 year career. And so I actually was going to go to Texas here. And I eventually went to Texas for business school, but I was going to go to Texas and had gotten a full ride there. So all my friends were going there. And so I was going to be very happy moving to Austin, Texas. And fortunately, I had one of the admission officers at West Point give me a buzz. And it was a guy from not too far off in another small town in South Texas. And he called me and he goes, dude, why haven't you finished your application? And I was like, well, because I'm not going. I'm going to Texas. All my buddies are there. He goes, look, man, I know guys like us don't go to West Point. He goes, if you can give it a shot, just try. He goes, at least just fill it out, like finish the thing at least, and then let them tell you no. And I remember I went back and I talked to a professor, or not a professor, a teacher of mine back in school. He's an old Army vet. And I kind of gave him a little bit of the update. He was just asking me how applications were going. And long story short, he just said, he says, man, are you an idiot? Like, he goes, look, if you're going to do this thing called the military, if you have the chance at all, go give it a go and see what happens. And so that little kick in the butt there got me to at least fill it out. And honestly, that was a long shot. I knew how hard it was to get in. I barely, I didn't have any family that went there or anything else. I just thought you had to be some child of a congressman or like some senator's kid or something. I didn't think like some small town Texas guy with two humble parents was going to get anywhere. And fortunately, maybe through a mistake, they said yes. And at that point in time, I was like, all right, we'll get headed to New York, which I've never been to before, And so went up there, best thing ever. Actually met my wife out there too. And so we got, two grads sitting in the house. She is the least, and I mean this in the most complimentary way possible. She is the least Army person you will ever meet. If you met her, you would think this lady is a creative artist, beekeeper, that kind of thing. But she is as hardcore and airplane jumping as anybody else. And so we ended up doing, the better part of a decade serving in the military. And I got to serve in some really great places. Started off in the lighter reconnaissance field, jumping out airplanes out of Alaska. And then later on made my way out to Fort Bragg and really ended my career there kind of working in the world of just the special operations and the USASOC and JSOC community and that stuff out there, and really just talk about having your eyes open about just such a great experience and just you already meet some of the best people coming in the military. But for me, like you go to that level of folks and you expect something, you kind of fantasize about what it might be. And then you realize that like the people get more humbler. They get more humble, whatever. That's the Marine Army lingo. I don't know if that's the right way to say it in English, but like you get more humble, they get more professional, they get more nice. The humor gets better. It's just and then they just have this lethality about them that doesn't showcase. I was very fortunate just through my career to be able to finally make my way out there and then close out. Got the bug eventually in the calling to go pursue business a little earlier than I thought it was going to be. And so after getting out of the service, kind of discerning what I wanted to do next, to be frank, I had no idea. I had applied to business school at Texas. but actually deferred because I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to do. I just assumed that's like what all this Army officer types do, like go apply to Army 2.0 and you just like go into this another pipeline, another, follow on school, so to speak. But I didn't really know if that's what I wanted to do or not. So we moved. My wife had gotten out before I did. And so I was going to meet her in New York. And had a gig lined up there with Goldman up in New York. And again, I still didn't really know what I was getting into. I just knew that I had some friends of mine in the service that had gotten out before I did. And all of them kept saying, look, man, get into finance. And I was like, man, I'm from South Texas, man. I can't do math that good. And they're like, well, it's not as much math as you think. It's a lot of relationships and it's a lot of just grunt work. And as long as you work late, you'll be fine. And I said, okay, they said, just get into finance. So that's where I went down that path. But I went to go visit her. She was working up there in New York and the New York, New Jersey area. And I'll admit, man, we were having dinner one day and I was like, do you like it up here? And do you like living out here? Like visiting is cool, but do you actually like being out here? And she goes, not really. I said, well, where would you want to go? She's from the Midwest. And I was like, where do you want to go? Do you want to go back to where you're from or what? She goes, well, I really like Texas. And so we started exploring Texas, and that's what eventually got us back down here. And my brother had moved to Austin, and he's like, hey, man, look, if you ever do move back to Texas, I know we grew up in South Texas, but Austin's got a lot going on. Come check it out. So he was right. So we moved back to Austin. Me applying to B school here was helpful to kind of create that catalyst. And when I got down here, I had zero plan. I had to say no to Goldman, said, hey, no, thank you. I'm not doing that. And I was just like, I'm going to figure it out when I get down there. And I don't even know what that means. And through some good luck and fortune, just God looking out, man, we had this gentleman in town who ran this finance and tech firm who was looking for a chief of staff. And I knew what a chief of staff in the Army was, but I didn't know what it was in the civilian world. And through some good connections and folks that said, hey, I think y'all would get along. It was the most random thing outside looking in, but struck up a partnership and I became his chief of staff. I learned so much in that short amount of time. I was in places I never thought I'd ever be before. I was in Silicon Valley and working with hedge funds in New York and like figuring out how you put lending products together and like build new tech and like all these things. Towards the end of my career there, I was running their kind of like internal venture arm of the business, so to speak, where we had several different lines of effort. And that's where I just really fell in love with the idea of creating new businesses and more importantly, like figuring out how to get the people dynamics. One of the things that started to click for me, I was like, man, we got all the money in the world. We got the smartest people in the world. We got the best talent, the best technology. And there were still moments we couldn't get anything done. And I was like, what is going on here? And I realized that we didn't have that same like tribalism and shared suffering that we had in the military. And so I started incorporating that into my ethos, which at the beginning, the board and a lot of folks thought it was quite nuts, man. I mean, we're doing some things that probably looking back, probably should have got some more waivers signed and things like that just to kind of like get people to galvanize, but it was working. And we ended up getting some really great progress there. And then from there, just kind of like snowballed into the rest of my career where I was running some of the investors in that company had other companies they had me take a look at. And then I would kind of run and take over those businesses and start growing them. And towards the end, about a few years ago, I started this company that was focused around, it's called Wyld Whisper. It's still ongoing now. And it was really getting back to my military roots where I wanted to focus on leadership and executive development, but like in a very extreme way. The way I kind of put it is like if Red Bull was running a team building, this is what the company was. And so we were taking folks into the wilderness of Alaska. We were doing like high stakes executive leadership by teaching them how to race rally cars and then like incorporating how you make those high decisions behind the wheel of like driving very fast. So it was like very interactive types of stuff that us three take for granted because the military was doing that to us all the time. And so I was just trying to format that in the civilian world because I could see the unlock happening. And then as I was running these businesses, or this particular business, is when Mainshares kind of came into my crosshair. And just one of those things, I'll say this, and then I probably just pause after this, but I'll say that like there's some times in your life where I'm sure, Beau and Brendan, you both have had like a opportunity that comes across that's so mission driven that it's a little bit like I'm sure like someone higher up like tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hey, I know you're having a lot of fun running this other thing, but but I think it's a little bit of a call to service again. I need you to go do this other thing with us and help us build this. And so I had to say yes. So I ended up about 6 months back saying yes to Mainshares, and particularly coming on to go run, build, and head their operator network here, which we can dive more into. And it's been awesome just hunting for the very best operators in the world to really help take the torch of that old generation of businesses in America and like carry it into the next 30, 40, 50 years. And so that's a little bit about me. And we're based here in Austin, Texas, and I think we'll be here in Texas for quite some time.
You tried the Northeast and you were just like, nah, dude, I'm back to Texas. It's not for me.
Yeah. I missed the fall and the colors, man. But yeah, I will tell you, it is hard to beat the Lone Star State.
Yeah,
You can always visit.
I got the fall and the colors, and I missed the heat, dude. But I have a couple just quick reactions and then just like a couple really quick questions. I want to double click on Mainshares. I want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial experience as well. Sure. But before I do, you mentioned like this well-trod path from the military into business school for like folks that are transitioning early in their careers. Made me think, I almost feel like there should be some like yellow footprints for business school, like they have a Paris Island. It's just such a well-worn path. Anyway, I guess that's not a very funny joke, but I tried.
No, I dig it, man. I like it. I think where your brain's at on that is like dead on. There's a lot of the times where I'm like, man, why don't we have this kind of forced in between step, at least like the last 6 months or something like that. Now I'm picking up what you're putting down.
I'm curious, just this is like my own personal curiosity. What was the deal with the Goldman piece? You were there for an internship. Was it like the Veterans Integration Program? What were you doing at the bank? Just kind of curious to hear a tiny bit about it.
Yeah, well, I never officially started with them, but I was supposed to join their private wealth management team. And so we I think it was at the time, I might have called it something else differently there, but it was this kind of veteran recruiting pipeline. And the idea was that I think I had actually between two things. It was either going to, which I now think they call Marcus. It was either like going down the kind of more customer facing tech route or going down the private wealth management route. And I think I liked the private wealth management route because it appeared to be less math. It appeared to be like, hey, look, you got to go out there, build great relationships. Hey, look, man, like we're a bunch of door kickers out here. So like I was looking at going like, hey, you got to build great relationships and, help manage a ton of their money and make sure it doesn't go upside down. And so that seemed like a exciting path there, but never ended up getting started with it. And thank God looking back.
Got it. Yeah. We got to get some private wealth guys on the pod. I don't actually know if we've ever had any, but there's so many veterans in private wealth who have great careers and they love it. But we will do that at some point. Out of curiosity for my own, again, just for myself, what year was it that you were interviewing for that internship?
Let me see here. Probably 16 or so, 15, 16, I think is when. Yeah, that's probably about the time frame.
Okay, we just missed each other. The reason I'm asking is I did that.
Oh, you
program,
did?
So I was wondering if we just missed each other.
Wow, did you actually go through with it, or did you end up deciding to go somewhere else? That's legit.
No, I did. Yeah, I did the internship for the MBA, and then I loved it so much I went back for the internship between my first and second year.
Small world, man. Yeah, there's a lot of us. You're right. To your point, there's kind of there's a bit of a what do they call that back in the servers? Like there's a bit of a goat path already kind of created, that a lot of us walk down.
Totally. Okay, so you end up not going that route, and you wind up back in Texas. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you landed that chief of staff role straight out of the military? Was this through business school? And then just for like transitioning vets that might be listening that are unfamiliar with those types of roles, what is a chief of staff? What do you do?
Yeah. The way I landed it was through a buddy of mine going through business school, and we had kind of started learning about what he did for a living out there. And what I recognized, I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And it kind of was looking and scrolling for just kind of their company and learning about it. Basically said, hey, look, the president of the company had retired and the CEO is looking for a guy to help him or gal to help him with the execution day-to-day of things, but doesn't want to go quite get a president. He still wants to be immersed in the culture and be hands-on. So he's looking for more of a chief of staff. It actually came from a recommendation that our chairman at the time, was Larry Ellison's at Oracle's chief of staff back in the day, and then went to go found several different billion-dollar companies after that. And so he had coached my CEO at the time, said, dude, you need one of me like to help you get things rolling. And so it was a little bit of a like, go find this guy or gal. And so I came into the picture quite late, actually. It was one of those things where when I got introed to him, I think the CEO at the time was just doing a favor for my buddy of mine who had worked with him. Just say, hey, you got to talk to this guy, Joseph. He's good people. I think you just get along. And even if you don't say yes to him on this thing, that's kind of how it kind of started to, and I think he had actually already made a decision on bringing somebody else on, or at least getting close to making that call. And again, I think just guy looking at it and then a little bit of chemistry there just kind of ended up, to be frank, I mean, one of the best things that's ever happened to me, just having that kind of close by mentorship and then being able to give a lot of reins to do the day-to-day of the business. To answer your second part on what a chief of staff is, it's a funny question in the civilian world. I feel like in politics and the military, it's very clear what a chief of staff is. And if anything, it actually is a role that a lot of us professionally in the military and even in politics look forward to getting. It's a kind of an important role. But in the civilian world, it can range everywhere from like just a calendar manager, which is unfortunate. Like that is probably the worst type of chief of staff, all the way to somebody who runs what I would consider more of a strategic chief of staff, is like a true thought leader to the CEO. The way I would capture it is like what I think a real chief of staff is meant to do in the civilian side is somebody who enables the execution arm of the CEO. And so you can think of them almost like the way a White House chief of staff would run, kind of for the president, kind of as the go-between all the major heads of the company, and then probably takes on a lot of the strategic stuff as a shortstop that doesn't quite fall between the CTO and the CMO. And the chief of staff there is kind of meant to be a chameleon and allow them to be able to take on these initiatives. The other thing from a reverse perspective is what's helpful for a chief of staff. What I often, when I now kind of talk with other leaders looking to bring a chief of staff on, what I'll tell them is your chief of staff, when you hire them, should be somebody you envision being a CEO at some point. Like that's the quality of person that you should be thinking about bringing on. This is just a training ground for them to eventually get there. So you can imagine having somebody who's got that kind of horsepower and potential that you get to leverage now, while also recognizing that you're probably not going to have them forever.
Follow-on question to that, because I think, in some ways, when I think of a chief of staff, certainly from the military lens, and I think from a political lens too, it's more of a gatekeeper, right? It's more than the schedule, but it's actually, okay, I'm going to decide, I have a little bit of the authority to decide who gets in to give them the talk or who doesn't. And I have a little bit of that. I have the confidence of the boss to be able to make some of those calls. I think it's something that veterans in particular would, and obviously in your case, have done well. But how do we get civilians, companies, or PEVC companies to understand that veterans are good at that job, right? I mean, is that something? I don't know that I think it's a natural thing for veterans to be able to understand and want to do. I don't know if it's something that, from the reverse, that a civilian company, a PEVC firm, has an opening like that. It's like, oh yeah, a veteran would be great at that. But how do we do better? 'Cause I think there is a natural fit, but I don't know that we do a good job of making that fit.
Yeah. I've heard some great VCs recently, like when they make an investment into certain companies now, like almost mandate that the founder has to hire a chief of staff. Like that's just kind of part of their whole entire thing, which is a cool thing to see. So I think we're starting to see that. My gut check on that, Beau, is like, I think we probably just got to help folks articulate how chiefs of staff de-risks revenue and de-risks execution. And I think, if anything, I would maybe even put it the other way. Like how does chiefs of staff enable revenue and enable execution? And I think that if we can kind of probably do a better job articulating that, my gut is that they'll end up probably bringing more and more of these folks on, especially within the military lens. I think that one thing that's probably a little bit of and y'all probably see this all the time in your line of business, one of the things about vets is that there's this kind of stigma that like they're great order takers and non-creative, but they're really good at just like doing the plan. Whereas y'all probably had personal experiences. I might be the only one, but please, if I'm not, let me know. But it's you get all this training, and it almost seems like every job that I did in the military, I had no training for. And so like it was like you got thrown in right away into this thing. You got to go figure out like, man, I've never loaded trains that have to go to Africa. Like that's crazy. Like how does that work? Or I've never been in this part of the world and I got to go figure out how to keep the boys fed and alive. Like there was no class on that. And so like there were some of these kinds of things that you think about that I think is where military folks do great, because they just throw them in the middle of a problem and they'll kind of just execute and figure it out.
That's why I feel like every leader I've ever had in the Marine Corps just always threw the message to Garcia at me. Just figure it the fuck out, man. How do I do X, Y, and Z? Just figure it the fuck out, man. Which does feel like it overlaps really nicely with the chief of staff role. My understanding of the chief of staff in the civilian world, I mean, it's going to vary business to business, right? But I once saw a graphic that was a continuum of like the types of tasks, the amount of time that was spent on strategic matters, and the decision-making authority. And on one end of the spectrum was an executive admin or executive assistant, which is sort of like, hey, they're helping with scheduling, the calendar maintenance, maybe following up on your emails, that kind of stuff. But on the other end of the spectrum was the chief of staff. And it wasn't someone that was necessarily scheduling your, scheduling Zoom calls for you, but rather someone that was a stand-in for the CEO and was specifically delegated some decision-making authority that the CEO would otherwise hold. And so to your point, that is like a training ground for a future CEO. It's someone that you are empowering with a level of authority that you otherwise might not get. And so my take, Beau, at your question is like, how can we convince folks that military folks might be really good at this? I do feel as though a lot of folks coming out of the service are actually generalists, right? They have some specific skill sets that are maybe hard skills, especially if they're logisticians or something like that. But if they're infantry guys, they have no hard skills. They're just, going to be able to figure it out in a variety of different types of situations, which I think overlaps really nicely with the chief of staff role. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, you nailed it.
I want to talk a little bit about Mainshares. So, you've mentioned that it was almost like a calling, like you feel like just like some sort of higher purpose that you were drawn to. What does Mainshares do? What is your guys' company, and what is its purpose and mission?
Yeah, man, it's in a nutshell, we fight for and back the next generation of owner and operators. And it's a short statement that I think means a ton. And I will tell you, every bit of that mission statement oozes here at the company. What might be helpful to kind of describe what we do is to kind of help understand like where we came from. So a few years back, we really started as a brokerage, just helping businesses sell, baby boomer style businesses sell their businesses. And then over time, we recognized capital was a constraint. And so we stood up an investment platform. We realized there was a ton of Americans that wanted to invest in small businesses, just like you invest in real estate and stock markets. And we realized that some of these businesses, funny thing, as a quick aside, I think small business is a funny word. We probably should come up with a different name for it, because a small business means you can do $50,000 in revenue or $25 million in revenue. And that's like a big swing. But either way, like that capital constraint became a real thing. And so we stood up this investment platform to allow, and in the early days, it was a lot of these searchers that would raise their business on the platform and meet investors. And that continues to happen today. And so we kind of just thought we were off to the races. Like that's all we really needed to do. And we were done. And what we recognized is that we were missing the third leg in the stool there, which is really figuring out how we invest in the operating part, which is, to be frank, the hardest part. It isn't, we get kind of tied into the acquisition part, and that's not easy by any means. But after you get through with that, arguably you actually get the hardest part is actually the running of the business. It's a little bit like going through all your training in the military, and there's no doubt that it was hard, whether it's Ranger training and infantry officer basic school and like all these things, you go through all this stuff. But the hard part is leading the boys in combat. Like that's the hard part. And we just recognized we weren't setting any of these folks up for success. And what was even happening even further is that a lot of these owners that were selling their businesses were very like, as they should be, very like emotionally tied to their business. We'd get to the 1 yard line, about to close the deal, and basically at the last second they'd go, I changed my mind. And we go, whoa, what happened? And they go, look, man, I've spent, 30 years building this thing. And, that guy from Wall Street seems nice, but I know what's going to happen. Like they're going to fire 25% of my workforce. Susan's not going to have a job. She's been with me. She's been my ride or die for 17 years in the front office. And you know what? I got to retire and stay in this town and go see these people at church, at the grocery store. You know what? Forget it. I'm just going to sell this business. I own the real estate. I'll sell the real estate. And I've been saving my whole life. I don't need the money as much. And so we recognize it's like, man, we got to do a better job introducing these guys and gals to like the sons and daughters they wish they had passed the business on to. And so that's where I came into the picture as we stood up the Operator Network, which is a community that gives you access to capital and a lot of SMB expertise. It's kind of like an MBA for Main Street meets all the tech and the capital you need, along with all the legal and diligence support that you need to do that. And I think what's even more powerful and kind of how the whole Mainshares ecosystem works is all the post stuff. So after you buy a business, we stay with you for as long as you want us with you, which is like to help you do all the call it some of the tougher day-to-day business ops, everything from like bookkeeping to insurance and doing business reviews and how things are looking, introducing you to mentors and advisors that can help you think about how you open up a second location. So it's one of these places that when you think of Mainshares, it's not only just fighting for the next generation, but it's truly being in the sidecar with them and not just kind of think of it as just a transaction, but instead this kind of full suite offering, which is a big mission to take on. But we do believe that like keeping businesses locally owned and in the hands of the next generation, which is why veterans really just kind of make one of the best archetypes for this type of profession. So that's it in a nutshell. And kind of where I was called to do it is when that was presented in front of me and what we were trying to build, specifically how that third leg needed to create some galvanization around it so that we could get it to where it's going. It's hard to say no to.
Totally. I want to get into a little bit of, before we hit record, we talked a little bit about the difference between search funds and how you guys view yourselves as operator first. So I want to get into that. But before I do, I just want to zoom out for 1 second and maybe just help lay a little bit of groundwork for folks that are transitioning directly out of the service, or maybe people that just aren't on Twitter. I see this shit all the time on Twitter. It's like constantly about buying and selling small businesses. But the general macro trend or like macro consideration that I hear a lot of searchers talk about is that there's this giant number of baby boomers who own small businesses, which to Joseph's point, they can be very, very small. $50,000 in revenue, I would say, is like extremely small as a one-person shop, and like one person who's not, feeding themselves super well, up to, $20 million business is pretty big. In my book, that's a decent sized business, probably like 50 employees or so, maybe 50 to 75, something like that. But these businesses, if they don't have, there's a meaningful number of these baby boomers who don't have someone to turn it over to, the next generation is not going to take over and run it. And so the question is like, well, what happens to the business after the entrepreneur goes? And so there's this growing industry around folks like yourself trying to help people figure this out, which is, and there's a variety of ways that people come at it. They'll come at it either from the perspective of a search fund operator who is going to raise some seed capital to support a period of time in which they're going to be searching for a business to purchase. You'll hear it called a fundless sponsor model, an independent sponsor, or a self-funded search where someone is not raising that external capital before the transaction, but they're raising capital in order to execute the transaction. And so the question I have for you, first I wanted to lay that groundwork. So anything that you have to add or any like nits that you would pick, because this is not where I specialize, would be much appreciated. I want to ask you, did I get those definitions correct between search fund, self-funded search, and then how do you guys view yourself in terms of the distinction between the search fund and your guys' operator first kind of mentality?
Yeah, we first of all, I think you did a killer job, Brendan. So I think that kind of laid the groundwork pretty good, man. So hey, not bad for a Marine, man. I approve. But when it comes to like some of the nuances in it, using an old military analogy, like at the end of the day, you remember when they used to tell us like, hey, all your specialties from like airborne to like heavy mechanized is really just how you get to the battlefield. At the end of the day, you're humping and you're like, you do the same thing. It's just kind of your transportation there. And so I think all the ways you described that.
We didn't have fancy in the Marine Corps. We didn't have fancy shit like ways to get to the battle apart from just walking. So
yeah, y'all walk.
No, I don't know that, but
we had a boat. We had ships. We had ships and feet.
Yeah, and your paddles, your flippers to swim in when you need to. I always, as an aside, man, I was working with the Chileans one time, and we were doing some training out there with their mountaineering teams, and their equipment they're so awesome. Their spirit is like they're some of the most lively soldiers I've ever worked with, because they also have like the most primitive equipment. They're definitely not as well funded. And I was like, man, this reminds me of like my Marine buddies. They guys don't have any of the top notch stuff, man. Like they got boots with holes in it, and that was what they were issued. They had holes in it. So
awesome.
But going back to it, man, like to me, all the different routes you described, it's a little bit like just different ways into ultimately becoming the owner and then operator of the business. And so there's a lot of ways into it. When you talk about the search, there's kind of really two big avenues to go down that route. One is you raise money from investors or an investor, and basically they're going to pay you a salary to go hunt for this next business that you're going to own. And then once it becomes something that's real, they end up helping you through that process and becoming getting on the cap table there and helping you kind of run that thing and continue to grow returns for the business and to continue to grow the business. The self-funded stuff is something we're actually seeing veterans do because, they either have some retirement or they have some, GI Bill that they're leveraging and they're doing it at the same time while they go to school, or they got some VA stuff that might help them, whatever it might be, but they're basically funding it out of their own income. It's kind of helpful because they also can potentially have a little bit more control in their destiny of like how much ownership they have when they do take over the business. And then there's a lot of nuances in between. You can even find these funds that are specifically oriented for being able to help folks do this. And there's just a lot of in-ways there. The reason we index here at Mainshares on the operator, so we do help searchers for sure. We actually have an entire team called searchers and sponsors that we help every single day and they're actually one of the more intense users of our investment platform because they're bringing a deal, they're finding investors, and they're executing. So we kind of help everybody. The reason we index on operator is because we recognize that like passive ownership is not the way to success. We got an entire advisor networks and growing. And these advisors, almost every single one of them that we interview, and these are guys and gals that have run business 3 or 4 years or 30, 40 years, second generation business owners, exited 7, 8, 9-figure businesses. And so it's been really great having them. They all say these are 3 things. Like you got to have all the baseline fundamentals, business acumen. Yeah, you got to be able to do a spreadsheet or at least know what numbers mean and all that stuff. But they said the biggest things that we need to make sure our folks have when they take over these businesses, do they have character? Do they have grit? And specifically, I don't like, can they take a lot of crap all the time? Because it's just like, it's never ending. You can't like spreadsheet your way out of like the fires you got to put out and run in these businesses. And then the last piece they say is, are they addicted to operating? Like if they don't actually want to run a business, there's no such thing as, I actually had one of our advisors on the podcast we have called the American Operator. And he said, look, dude, if you want passive income, go buy a stock. Otherwise, don't go buy a business. He goes, a business just requires a ton of work, which is where military folks do really well because it's a little bit of this trust but verify. You're getting your hands dirty with the team, all those things that don't always pencil when you've worked in maybe a corporate setting where you can kind of like do a couple, do your emails and kind of like, push the information out, but not actually go check on the front line on what's going on. So we over index on the operate side. So it isn't that we don't believe in helping folks that are searching and those things, but even when we do talk to folks that are going down that path, we're very clear about like, hey, what is your engagement with this business? Are you looking to just buy it, immediately put a general manager in charge and like be hands off, or what's your thoughts on that? And we do our best to counsel them in and being actually involved in their business, at least for the first chunk of time to really get it going.
For sure. Okay, that's helpful. I want to ask, so I understand that Mainshares it started out as a lower middle market investment bank. You bolted on this investing platform to help folks that are raising capital to purchase these businesses, meet investors who are interested in the asset class. And now you've got this operating vertical. So what do you specifically do at the firm? Like what is your role? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, I spend my time not only hunting for the very best operators, future owner and operators there, but also continuing to build the foundation here and continue to build the programs and build the kind of enduring system here that's going to allow our operators to be successful. And so we have an entire team, and I'm kind of pointing to my left here. They all, we have an entire bullpen of folks that really make up and do the day-to-day hard work on making sure operators have everything they need. So what I do at the firm is head that team. And what that team does from a day-to-day experience is, one, we go hunt for the best operators. So we're out there combing through the entire United States on who is going to make a great operator. And this is everything from veteran groups to MBA teams to like plumbing associations that have really great trades folks that would make really great plumbing owners because they also have a master certification, and they also just showed leadership because they've worked somewhere and now they're the general manager. So we go hunt for these folks. We also have an entire development arm. That entire portion of the operator network is the MBA for Main Street. It is everything from online education and modules, live workshops, community, people and access, the advisor network, mentorship, coaching, all that stuff that kind of is incorporated in that to really give them the tools and resources to be successful. And then we have what we call operator success as a part of the operator network. And operator success is a couple-fold. One, for folks that are looking on the hunting side, we can recognize it's pretty lonely when you're out there trying to find a business. And not only is it lonely, but it's just like most of our friends aren't doing this. They actually kind of think we're crazy for like going out there and trying to like get into business or like own your own thing. It's like what are you doing? You're just going to leave this W-2 job to go buy a business and take on all this risk. And so recognizing that, we want to be a real partner with them. So we have an entire team here called Operator Success that once an operator comes into our ecosystem, gets developed, and then they enter the point where they go, hey, I want to do it for real. I have a business I'm looking at. Let's go make it happen. We help them from everything from diligence to like how you put an LOI together to like, how does it, is this a deal that we would kind of do? And if it is, what are the red flags to look at? And then once they kind of get further in the cycle there, we start wrapping our arms around with our ecosystem on the capital side. Like, hey, this is how you can actually make the deal come to life. This is what the structure would look like and how it works. And then also because of our former relationships from being a brokerage before, we have a lot of relationships with business owners that continue to like bring us businesses. And so to the extent that we can help match them with a business and kind of help that process a little, bring the fish closer to the boat so they can catch it, we do that as well. And then finally, what we do on the operator success side is after they've bought the business and they've closed on it, we stay with them and help them operate, and by giving them insights, continue to give them mentorship, education. And we're actually working on through ways now where we can actually help educate their employees on things as well. So it's a really kind of full suite process. And then the last piece of the operator network is just a bunch of content we're throwing out there. We're continuing to ramp up all that stuff here and get just kind of the education out there about owning a business. I don't know about y'all, but like I did not realize, and I watched my mother do it. It's probably why I had only insights, but like I think a lot of folks don't think about ownership as like a career path. Usually it's like go to the corporate route or you have to start your own business. But I don't think a lot of folks recognize like you can buy a high, well-functioning business, and there's a way to go do that. And there's a lot of people here to go do that. So what this team does here in the Operator Network really is the kind of called the community SMB expertise and like the execution arm of kind of facilitating these operators through the path here so that we can tee them up in the right ways and set them up for success as they become new owners.
Man, you guys got a lot going on.
A lot going on, man. Yeah, it was a big, like, we didn't want to take a small bite of that burger. We were like, let's put the whole thing, let's go take the biggest thing we can. Cause it just, I tell folks, our operators, like, we're just really putting our money where our mouth is, because we recognize, like, we could have just been the transaction arm. Like, hey, that's it, transaction arm, and been done. And it would probably been fine, and we would have run an okay business. But I think for us, we recognize, like, the full suite approach is really the right way to go.
Joseph, I have a little bit of a hot take on search funds and on the industry in general that I'm hoping that you will help rebut and tell me why I'm wrong. It's not my intent to like debate you on the show, but like I do see a lot of content about buying small businesses online. If you spend any time on Twitter, you probably see it constantly. And I feel like people sort of yada yada over how difficult it is. To your point, like, you've already sort of disproven one of the myths around this space, which is the idea of passive ownership and like, hey, I'm just going to buy this asset and then it's going to grow, and then I'll exit it at some point in the future. And I'm going to be clipping coupons for the next decade, and then I'm going to exit it. It's like that's not the case. Like, this is always hard. Business is a knife fight. Like, you got to come prepared and ready to get your hands dirty. But my hot take on search funds is just generally how difficult it is and how much I think people underestimate the level of difficulty. The reason that I think that is I just imagine the amount of skills that someone has to have in order to close on a deal, it's significant. Like, you need to be able to not only find the right businesses, which is a sales process. So you've got to build your target list. You got to reach out to people. You got to convince them why you're the right person to purchase their business. You're going to be competing against these lower middle market private equity funds that have more robust infrastructure to do the same thing. They've got more capital to be able to do it as well. They've got more capital for follow on after they do their investment to be able to bring additional resources to bear to grow the business. So you're competing with these folks just to get to the starting line. And then you're putting yourself in a position where there's a binary outcome. So you are an entrepreneur, and so you can see revenue growing over time, which is always, it puts wind in the sails when you're getting some wins along the way. But in this search fund model or an independent sponsor model, you're going to get a yes from a seller, or you're going to get a no. And so you're either going to close on that deal or you're not going to close on that deal. And that's a tough spot to be in, I think. And that's just to get to the starting line. And then from there, you got to quickly learn the business model, the industry, in order to be essentially just sprinting right out of the gate. And then you put on top of that the SBA loan that people take out to purchase the businesses. It just, to me, it seems like a lot of risk. Now, I do think it's a great choice for people that have business experience. But I guess my fear is that there will be a bunch of transitioning veterans who don't have the business experience. They're going to put themselves in this position where they're going to be purchasing a business. And that's just, to me, just seems like a lot to take on right out of the gate. But curious if you have any thoughts or ways that you would push back against anything that I just said.
No, I don't know that I got anything there, but I think it's tough. I think when you sign the dotted line, you're personally guaranteeing the business. Like there's a lot of things that become real quick. And I think I think there's no right or wrong way to serve this country in the private sector. Like there's people who are climbing the ladder at Goldman that I think are doing good work. And I think for anybody looking to be an owner, what I would tell them is make sure you have a support system and a group of folks around you to do it. I mean, even for us doing risky stuff overseas and like going into some crazy, like you'd never just go in by yourself. And I think it's just irresponsible. So like whether it's, working with you all or even working with us, just like make sure you have a robust, genuine mission aligned community around you that's actually like going to do what they say. I think there's a lot of, to your point, there's a lot of rhetoric online. And it's one of those things that makes me cringe because it's just so like, oh, it's so easy. It's passive income, do these things. And man, people are getting in trouble real quick doing that because the capital actually isn't the hard part. The hard part is actually keeping it alive and making sure that you don't go. And there's plenty of great businesses that new operators take over and they go bankrupt in 5 years because like they grew out of, like, it's weird to think you could you could grow into bankruptcy, like it's one of those things where if you're not careful, which is where like here at the Operator Network of Mainshares, we're like, hey man, we got to make sure that when we're putting people in touch with these businesses, that we also stay with them and like have our hand on their back and go, hey, okay, hold on, go left, go right. If you need, because I think it's one of those things that as you're navigating those paths, it's not something that's easy. So I don't know that I got a thing to rebut more than just to kind of double tap on the fact that like, yeah, you gotta be really thoughtful about how you're going about doing this. But if you are going to do it, I think it's really, on the other point, I think there's nothing outside of the military. I think there's nothing probably more fulfilling from a service perspective than like seeing like, I don't know, Higgins plumbing on the T-ball field or something, it's like that old school, like you're giving back to the community. Like you can, like that stuff feels like $1 million, right? The fact you're taking care of this tribe every day, you like feel like you're a platoon leader again. Like it just feels great. But at the same time, you got to make sure you set yourself up first on the business side by doing it right. So yeah, no, I don't think I have anything to rebut other than just to agree with you that, yeah, you got to make sure you put yourself involve yourself with a community or with a group of experts and know what they're doing.
Yeah.
How are you finding the businesses and the talent that you're dealing with in general? I mean, it sounds like it's pretty scrappy just every day out there, or is the word get out there and people are coming to you more now, or is it just, I'm just curious, and what have you found most effective to market what you're providing? Because it is somewhat unique. At least I'm new to this space, but I think you offer some things that are a little bit different. And how are you trying to differentiate yourself in getting the word out for what you're doing from both the operator side and the business side of the house?
Yeah. We're doing a couple things. One, just from a brand perspective, being very almost like we're on purpose telling folks not everybody can do this, and on purpose, just because we like not everybody should do this. Like this is actually something that it would be hurting yourself if you just wanted to just go, get in. So I think in some ways it's helping us filter through who does come through the pipe. It's a little bit like kind of the more elite tiers of the military. They on purpose are like, hey, look, only 5% of folks who try out make it. And then you get the right people who actually want to go try out. And so that's kind of how we take that approach. And then in addition to that, from the operator side of the house, fortunately, we're at this point now where we can start seeing the gravity coming to us. But really, it's been a lot of just, I was at Duke ETA's group, Macombs ETA's group, different MBA programs, just talking to their veteran groups and chatting with them about how that works. We talked to former athletes, talked to former pro athletes. We also talked to a lot of trades folks, to the extent, or we are trying to get more trade folks. That's probably more accurate. We're trying to get more trades folks in there, and they're a little tougher to find. A lot of them don't want to necessarily be owners. Or think they can be. And so for us, it's figuring out ways that we go find them. But to kind of like probably summarize how we go find these operators, we find all over the place. And everything from like getting them right as they transition out of the service, when they're doing their out processing and stuff, and figuring out how we talk to talk to the group and figure out who the few want to become owners and how we can help educate them on what that process looks like, all the way to the more sophisticated MBAs that kind of already have an understanding of this. but have had this feeling of like, hey, I don't want to just be a good buyer. I want to be a good owner and an operator. That's kind of how we do find these folks. But I think as time goes by and us putting out content and word of mouth, that'll continue to pick up steam. And then quickly on the other side of it with the businesses, I think our benefit of starting as a brokerage allowed us to kind of create that initial gravity coming through about these businesses coming through. But what's interesting is that we find a lot of our advisors and a lot of former owners will introduce us to businesses. And to our extent that we can kind of get in the business, we got a team right now, that's all they do is like they review business deals all the time. And then what we do is we figure out like what this business actually is, who would be a great fit. And then we kind of go back into our, armory of great operators and figure out who might be the best match on that. And so that's kind of how we find those. But it's one of those things, Beau, that we're still continuing to create more throughways by finding good people out there. And last thing I'll say is like, we'll find folks sometimes in places that we didn't expect. We'll find operators in places that, or in an environment and an event or whatever that we had no idea would make a good owner. And just through conversation and just through that very hand-to-hand kind of engagement there, we're able to find some really great folks.
I want to interject with just a couple of quick flags. If you've heard Joseph, use the acronym ETA, that is entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is like the non-moron way to say this. I've been saying search funds all the time and using that term too loosely. ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, is I think the preferred term. And then the second flag I want to provide is, Beau, please hang out on the line after this. I want to talk about launching Higgins Plumbing. I think there's a there. We just let that one go completely.
I'm good. I'm good. It's like I'm Bad News Bears, Chico's bail bonds. I'm going to be out there, I'm ready.
You have calcium buildup in your pipes? You ought to talk to Beau Higgins. He can get you squared away.
There you go. No, your name is like the ultimate tagline.
Perfect.
It's fun to say. Okay. Getting back on point here. I have one final question before I move to just like general advice you might have for transitioning vets. But before we get there, I want to ask one final question is, who should consider buying a small business and who should avoid it? You've given us some of the characteristics. Maybe you want to elaborate on those. Character, grit, people that love to operate. You can elaborate on those. You can provide us with, really take the question in any direction that you like. Who should consider buying a small business and who should avoid it?
I think who should consider buying a small business? I think everybody should consider it, but I think you then have to go one level deeper and go, am I the right fit to go do this thing? And I think like the reason you would consider it is that I think you find that these businesses really are a manifestation of true, the amount of community impact these folks make are just incredible. And not only from a service that they provide perspective, but also for the fact that a lot of these folks are they're so core to the DNA of these local communities that I think if you want to consider the ability, a lot of us think about how do I nationally kind of give back or how do I serve this country in the biggest form? In a lot of ways, we forget that like you can just do that in your small town in Texas by like running this really great electrical supply company or manufacturing firm or whatever it might be. And so I think the folks who find themselves missing this tribal aspect of business, which is you got this group of 30 to 40 folks that you get to really put your arms around and operate, I think ought to consider it. I think the characteristics outside of grit and outside of character is like, do you have what I would consider physical leadership? Like, is your ability to move people? Because a lot of these businesses, not all of them, like you might have a marketing agency that's got a little bit of a different talent pool. A lot of these businesses require that same talent and grit that's required when we were like in the service. Like getting the team to move requires your presence and it requires your actual initiation of movement. Sometimes even you going down to the front lines where the trucks are to like get things going and get things moving. And so I think if you feel like you just have that ability and that natural kind of lean to it, I think these are the folks that should consider small business. Folks that should not consider small business ownership, I think, are folks that are much more invested minded. And I'm talking about from an operating perspective. I think you should definitely invest in small business. But I think if you're at a point in your life or you're just someone who recognizes that you're not interested in operating, like if your goal is to buy a business like you would buy a stock and then kind of not be involved, I think it's very dangerous. I think you'll find yourself either being out of business or your business being really on the fritz if you're not careful. I think the other person or the other kind of thing to think about not buying a business is not spending enough time figuring out how you provide unique value to it. I think with veterans, a lot of people leadership, there's just natural value. But I think if you haven't sat back and actually went, how do I actually think that I can add value to this business? I think it's one of those exercises, not a good idea to like go buy one and figure that out. I think you got to stand back. For our trades folks out there, it's kind of a duh. Like 18 years as a plumber, they're master certified. They've been running the day-to-day of the business. They want to go own their own now. That makes a ton of sense. You've already figured that out. But I think for a lot of folks out there, they're maybe sitting in an MBA class and they're like, I think I want to buy a small business. And you go, cool. What do you want to buy? A plumbing company? Okay, great. Why? Or why do you think you're going to actually help this business continue to grow? I think folks that haven't done that exercise should take some time to really consider and really kind of spend more time kind of evaluating where they're at before they take that on. And there's other folks that probably should not be buying these businesses, but I think for right now, that's probably a good starting point as to the pros and cons of doing it that way.
For sure. There's a trade-off between risk and reward. So for folks that might not be open to as much risk, a W-2 might make more sense. For folks that are open to more risk and hoping for a higher reward, entrepreneurship through acquisition could be a good fit. Joseph, I want to bring things home by asking you two questions. One, let's just start with just any general advice that you would have for folks that are transitioning out of the military today. You can take the question in any direction that you like based on your own experience from the folks that you're coaching and mentoring through your business, but any advice that you would provide for folks that are transitioning out of the service?
Yeah, I mean, man, if you can afford to just go climb a mountain for 3 months, I think I'd do that first. I think if you could just like get away from, I mean, we've been blessed in the service to have like so much, you never didn't know where you needed to be or what job you're. So if you can spend some time just like evaluating what makes you tick, either through talking to other folks or just being by yourself, in the Cascades somewhere, whatever it might be, just like spending some time with your own thoughts. I can't tell you how valuable it is, and I wish I'd given myself more time to do that. So I think that's probably my initial advice. And then secondarily, I think I think a lot of veterans get out and they over-index because I get it. It's a little bit scary, right? But like they over-index on like income benefits or something. And I would say if you can go find something where like you feel that tribal sense, because there's a lot of great private companies that like have that same tribalism that you had in the service. If you can index on that culture piece there, I think recognizing your first gig may not be your first job, but I think to kind of help you set yourself up for at least the initial kind of step into the private sector, I think over-index on finding a good team first or finding a good boss to work for, like somebody you just click with, right? Maybe they were in the military, maybe they weren't, but you recognize like may not be the highest paying job, but it's the one that like, man, that Brendan guy, like something about like, I feel like he takes care of people. I think something like that will give you a good taste in your mouth about the private sector and then allow you to kind of springboard into the next thing. So that'd be my two nuggets of advice.
I can't agree with you anymore. Like finding the right fit and finding the right people specifically should be like first and foremost, I think, in people's minds as they're thinking about every career opportunity, frankly.
Yeah.
Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find out more and support your work?
Yeah, just look us up on Mainshares.com or operators.mainshares.com. You can take a look at all the things we're working on there, especially if you want to be part of the community. We even have a program called Forge. We host it 4 times a year. It's like this immersive. We kick off here in Austin. I don't want to give too much of the secrets away, but like, let's just put it this way. The first 3 days of this entire program are not very business oriented. It's a lot of grit and character oriented. And so we do that on purpose because we recognize that's like the special sauce to being a good business owner and an operator. And then we have our own content that we push out called the American Operator. And it's just, we're talking to owners, we're talking to folks, we're in the field. You'll have some cool content of us behind the scenes, a little bit like Dirty Jobs kind of where we're actually in the field doing stuff. So if folks want to follow and just get a glimpse of what that's like, and then, how we can help them, just hit us up in any of those things there. When we love this stuff here, in any way that we can serve folks that want to continue serving their communities, we're ready to go.
Super cool. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Stoked to be here. Thanks, y'all.
If you're tuning in and listening, thank you so much for tuning in this week. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. I do this at the end of every episode. I tell you about all these upcoming events that we have. So today I'm just going to leave it at check out the milvet.org/events. We've got happy hours. We've got live events coming to your town and to cities all across America. We also have the Military Veteran Startup Conference. It's a really special event. That's February 5th and 6th in San Francisco. We draw about 450 or 500 folks every year. If you're interested in early stage stuff, come check it out. You can learn more about that event at milvetstartups.com. Hit up Joseph Cabrera, Beau Higgins, or myself on LinkedIn, and we'll check you guys back here next week. Thanks so much for listening.